Wonderful. So welcome everyone to Thursday of TD week and this particular session on learning environments that foster student well-being. My name is Dr. Lauren Anstey. I am an educational developer in the Center for Teaching and Learning. My pronouns are she, her, and I do identify as a white settler on this land. I will turn it over to Jodi for her introductions as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jodi Weber. I am a PhD candidate in my, dare I say, 5th year in the Aging and Health program in the Faculty of Health Science. My background is social work, and I've been a practicing social worker for 20 years, mostly with older adults, but increasingly with adults of all ages. So I'm really excited to be here today. And I'd like to start our session. We're still waiting as I see people come in, but I'd like to start our session with a landing. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead with the land acknowledgement.
With the land acknowledgement. So perhaps you've heard before, unless you're new to Queens, that Queens is on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee, and we are very privileged to be able to live and learn and play in those territories, in their traditional territories of those people. But today, I'm coming to you from Southampton in Bruce County, which is the traditional lands of the Chippewa of Saugeen, which is a First Nation, a Ojibwe First Nation. And so I wanted to take a moment to reflect on what these lands mean to me and share with you photos of my family from 4 seasons of living here recently through the pandemic. And in preparing for today, I was thinking about the land and my place on the land and what a tremendous privilege it is to be a guest here, and especially during the pandemic, to have felt the refuge of the land, almost like a silent 5th family member through the summer. And you can see my family hiking in the fall and my children skating, and how important the land is in our life and what it means to be a white, able-bodied, heterosexual settler on these lands, and the immense privilege that I have in the embodiment of all of those privileges. So I invite you, wherever you are today, to take a moment to reflect and give gratitude and thanks, and recognize the land as an expression really of gratitude and appreciation. Maybe we could go back to the session outcomes.
For sure. So really in our session, we are focused on well-being, but we certainly intend to support you in thinking about sharing and reflecting on teaching practices specifically that will promote or can support students in their well-being. And to us, that meant considering small practices. And by small, we mean maybe they feel a little easy to implement, or those things that might feel intuitive, but when we give them a name or when we talk about them, they come to life a little bit better for us, and that we can enact them in our day-to-day. And a lot of what we talk about, of course, is related to identifying other resources on campus aside from ourselves as instructors or ourselves as educators. And so we will definitely be sharing a couple places where that's particularly relevant. And as mentioned, I'm going to post once more, we've had a couple people join us, that we do have some session resources available through the short link that has been in the chat and is there on the slide. And we will be referring to the mentee activity, so feel free to keep completing that as we go along.
So why well-being? So when we think about what it means to keep students well and to be part of a wellness journey and for wellness ourselves, it's really happening in this context of today's pressures on students. And as I was watching CBS Sunday Morning a few weeks ago, I was really struck by this vignette that they had talking about the pressure to succeed that students coming into university now feel. And I realized with this slide that I'm dating myself because my own children are like, oh, what's that slide from? And I'm like, oh, only like the most famous movie in the world. But for students today, it really can feel like they're going over the cliff, that every success ends and they're not building on their successes. And so I just want you to think about your classrooms and learners at Queen's today who themselves embody a great deal of privilege when they come in and have been extremely successful academically, which is what has led them to Queen's often in the first place. But that pressure to succeed can manifest in some very difficult ways. And before the pandemic, we know that depression and anxiety was going up. And initially, after the lockdown happened, anxiety went way down. But what researchers have found, particularly in the US, is that it's began to climb again. So as we start this new academic year, I just invite you to keep that in the back of your mind.
If you've had a chance to complete the Mentee Meter so far, we had a question there of what well-being means to you. And we wanted to put this question to you early on in the session because we felt it was important to get a kind of a group understanding of what we're talking about when we say well-being. And so let me show you how that Mentee Meter is going. You can still be contributing to that field or that question as we go, but here's what's coming in so far. So folks here have been asked to share words that come to mind when they think of the definition or the concept of well-being. And it certainly doesn't surprise me that we're seeing lots of different words, but that a few are standing out. Of course, health, yes. And maybe that's unpacked a little bit with mental health, spiritual health, being emotionally well. And Jodi, feel free to jump in because there's lots of great words here. What stands out to you?
I'm seeing calm and support and happiness, which really resonate with me. And to be honest, I hadn't thought about happiness as a construct really coming into well-being, but that seems to be a big word. So it means quite a few people have said it.
Yeah, and there's such great words here: boundaries, positivity, feeling nourished, relaxed. And as I was looking to some of the literature, I found a really fantastic definition of well-being, and it was talking about the balance, or the sense of balance we have between the resources that we have available to us and what we feel we are experiencing or going through. And that well-being is that sense of balance between those things, that the resources match maybe some of the challenges we face in our lives, because we will ultimately always be facing some degree or some feeling of challenge, where well-being becomes imbalanced, or maybe a sense of not having the well-being is when resources might not match those challenges. And I thought that was a really interesting, different way for me to be thinking about well-being, but one that struck. And of course, they talked about well-being holistically, that it's not just a single form of, say, physical health, but as you've highlighted, as many people have noted here in the various words that are coming up, really a holistic sense that incorporates many, many aspects of our lives. So thank you for participating in that. And we will switch back over to the Mentee for the second question that was posed to you as well in just a moment. But I wanted to speak a little bit to, well-being when we think of it here on our campus. So of course, there are very specific supports, various supports for students and their well-being on campus. And here's a couple that came to our minds. Everything from student academic success services and wellness services, accessibility services, various units on campus that support students in different ways, but also other, cultural and community groups. So Four Directions Indigenous Student Center, the Alma Mater Society, Athletics and Recreation. And I am certain that in this list we have missed or not included other important campus supports that are on campus and really intended to support students in their well-being. Absolutely. And then another realm of student success and well-being is effective teaching practices. And this might include a wide range of people, faculty and their instructor role, graduate students who often are in the position of teaching assistants, peers, laboratory coordinators, academic advisors, etc. And what we're interested in talking about today is the intersection between effective teaching practices and those supports for student well-being. So I wanted to recognize that some aspects of student support and student well-being, in fact, quite a large body of representation from across campus, will not always deal explicitly with the teaching. That will serve various roles, especially when we're talking about more crisis or emergency situations and not being well. But there is this overlap here and this interconnection, this space where teaching becomes interwoven with students' well-being. And that is the focus of our session today. Now, there's two important caveats as well, or two sort of points that go along with this. So as Jodi and I were prepping, she said something that kind of stuck with me, as that these practices that we will focus on, we are focused on we're working well upstream. So well up the flow of support or of action that we can take for students. Because there might be other important aspects of supporting students, but some of those small things we can do early on can have a big impact as all of those supports start to come together for students. And another very important point is that we each have different but integral roles to play. So this is an image of the Canadian women's soccer team and the coach of that team at the Olympics. And it stuck out to me because there are so many people serving different roles in this photograph. The coach, and behind her, the coaching staff, someone sitting up in the wings, but very much associated with the team, and then the players who are on the field. And we might all have different inputs or opportunities to have influence on students' well-being. And that kind of brings us around then to an important question, and one of the other questions of our mentee meter. What is your role? And we invite you to reflect on that. Do you consider yourself more on the instructional side of your role, as you come here to TD Week, or possibly in student support? And then if it is instructional, possibly you see yourself more as a teaching assistant, an instructor, or educational support professional. So what I'm going to do is switch over again to the mentee meter and flip over to the slide where we were asking those who have contributed so far, what option or what descriptor sort of best describes you in this teaching context, or the way that, in having joined TD Week. And we can see lots of folks reporting that they are first-time teaching assistants or teaching assistants with some experience. Certainly some folks who are in more of the instructor role, staff, and then a few who are describing this doesn't quite capture your title, the position you see yourself in. So we would invite others to share in the chat what sort of position you're coming from, and also that reflection of what do you think this means then for your role in supporting students.
You're welcome to unmute yourself as well if it's just faster and easier.
Yeah, because we really would like to hear from you, and that sort of meeting of consideration between role and then your perception of what sort of responsibility you might feel towards supporting student well-being. So far, some comments coming into the chat. Reagan just clarifying that that they are a teaching fellow and graduate student, but not feeling as though they identify as a TA, which is really great perspective. And Jill commenting that being a co-instructor, it can be tricky, difficult to navigate. Absolutely.
As teaching assistants, we're sometimes wearing different hats and we have different responsibilities. Sometimes we are very much a behind the scenes and we're doing grading and marking assignments. And other times we are in a position where we're leading labs or leading tutorials, and we'd have a much different role. So even within the roles, I recognize that, you know, you're wearing many different hats.
And we invite you to keep this perspective in mind, because it will become even further important as we go on with the presentation. We recognize that as we transition into talking about strategies or action tasks, you know, that you could do to support student well-being, that will be mediated by the position or the role you perceive yourself to be in, and that, for example, I hear often from teaching assistants that they don't feel they have, or they know they don't have as much control over the learning environment as, say, their instructors do, who would have a lot more autonomy or just time to do and responsibility to shape the course and the curriculum. So, you know, we will all come from different perspectives, and just keep that in mind as we go forward with talking about strategies and actions.
Many hats. So some great experience coming through in the chat with people co-instructing, and that is a different kettle of fish altogether, where you might be partnered with somebody who you didn't choose and you have different styles. So lots to balance there, as well as considering how to be accountable and responsible both for your class, but also for your teaching assistants too, as Tara is.
Great point. Yeah, for the team and for a collection of peers who you are connected with. Kelly has a great point that sometimes, many times, I mean, who doesn't have multiple roles or different hats that they are wearing, depending on the job. Lots of us have multiple jobs on the go. And sometimes that shifts what we perceive to be our responsibility, or how and where we're able to take action. So let's get into some of the body of talking through some of these strategies. And we wanted to acknowledge that we have pulled very strongly upon one particular resource arising from the University of British Columbia and the work of Lane and colleagues from 2018, where they did a study of exactly this. They were focused on teaching and the teaching and learning environment, and what sort of tasks or what sort of actions seemed to contribute directly to students' sense of well-being in that space. And their literature, their work is summarized by this slide here, that student well-being is improved through these three avenues. One, effective teaching strategies. So students, when they're motivated to learn and they feel they are learning successfully. Two, a sense of belonging and social inclusion. So when students feel connected to their peers and to their instructors. And third, number 3, support for the whole student. So instructors recognize that students' experiences extend beyond academics. Now, this is the overview. This is high level. And what we loved about Lane and colleagues' resource is that they really break this down very tangibly for instructors. We will use this as a guide for some of our discussion today, but part of the resources that are in the folder of session resources is a handout from Lane et al., where you'll see a lot more of the description and detail that goes into or is behind these 3 elements. So you can see even here on the slide, there are those check boxes. And even under all of those check boxes, there are still descriptors as to actions or specific things that could be done in the classroom. Now, noting time and wanting to really dive more deeply into actual, conversation about these things, Jodi and I selected 3 of these things to look at more specifically: structuring the course effectively, fostering student and instructor relationships, and creating a safe classroom environment.
So if we pick, just like Lauren was saying, a few of those things, what I'd like to talk about, and I really invite you to, this is a conversation, so feel free to unmute yourself or to put in the chat any of your ideas or thoughts or share strategies of your own that have been successful. But if we really think about structuring the course effectively, especially if you're a teaching assistant, you don't have the kind of control where you're setting the syllabus and the readings. But what can you do? So I wanted to share some personal examples from my teaching assistant experience. Well, I have found that consistency is the key, and to know the rubrics that you're using and figure out how to apply them consistently across the student body. One of the things from an earlier session this week with Jake DeRoche on Monday, what I really liked was he was talking about creating a sort of standard template of comments for each of the rubric. My words are failing me now. That Coke Zero has gone right to my head, just as they always said it would, for each of the grade points, basically. So have an idea so that you can provide consistent comments across the whole class. The other thing I have found to be really, really helpful is just before assignments are due, really clarify the expectations around what you're looking for, what the gold standard might be. So I like to use the announcement feature in OnCue with my instructor's permission, just to give everyone a very general, A, bit of encouragement, but B, to really talk about pitfalls from previous classes where people have got into trouble or where they've really shone and called that out. And really, what are the key features of strong assignments? And make sure that there are no surprises. So if there's going to be, if it's a multiple choice exam, really maybe try and provide a couple of sample questions so that students can get a feel for the language and it helps them feel more comfortable and supported. And again, you can see providing practice problems. So if you are in engineering or math or science, giving people problems that they might have to solve in labs or in exams is very, very helpful, and it helps create a sense of trust and reciprocity with the class. Next slide.
Well, and just picking up here, I was just thinking as you were talking how important it is for a line of communication between TAs and instructors, so that, as TAs, you can ask the instructor of the course to clarify where there's opportunity for you to be giving this kind of guidance or clarity to students, where there might be opportunities to be facilitating learning around some of those practice problems, because sometimes that's implicit between the instructor and the TA, where the instructor is comfortable with that kind of detail being shared and how. But certainly talking about that and coming up with some clarity for you as a TA and then for instructors can really help. And Jodi, I also wanted to bring up that that I'm finding myself on Twitter a lot more as a not so great coping mechanism to all the change that's happening. But I came across this really great tweet from a student at University of Guelph in undergraduate studies in zoology. And they were talking about a sense of well-being. And this was her comment: "I just want consistency with learning. Every time we change, my grades drop so much." And I thought, this is a student who is not doing as well. Her well-being isn't as strong as she might like it to be, because it is stressful for your grades to be changing. And yet what she's asking for is consistency and ultimately clarity, because I think clarity would help a lot here for the student, that we're going through so much, there's so much change, and yet this strategy can help. Now, we're also wondering too, are there ideas that are coming to mind for you? Are there questions that you currently have related to course structure and your role? Yeah. We will hold on a moment to see if there are questions that come in, or comments that come in before we move on to our second field. Always feel free to be popping those into the chat, even as we continue on. But I do invite you, as we're going through these strategies, to be sharing what works, to be posing questions, things that don't feel particularly clear to you right now on maybe what you could do or how you could do it. All of those are welcomed, and we really invite that kind of participation.
So the next area that we really thought needed calling out was around fostering these instructor-student relationships. And again, your instructor, when you're a teaching assistant, often sets the tone, but you still have tremendous impact on students in the classroom, in the lab. And so again, going back to my own experience, what I have found is really helpful is really a strong introduction. And the way that I do that is often through a video, probably because most of our program is virtual and the classes that I am a teaching assistant for are online. So I like to prepare a sort of 1-minute video of myself. It's usually from my car, and I tell students a little bit about myself, and I am allowed to control the narrative in that. And they tend to be quite informative and personal, but I really like the discourse it sort of creates with students, because it's okay to be real and like not to have all the answers, and create an approachable environment. Now, I can say that, I'm an extrovert, so making a little video, although technically challenged, and in my car, because my car is my safe space during the pandemic with 3 children, but it can be anything. You could even just type a little blurb and again, post it and invite your students to post back as well about something about themselves, to introduce themselves. And I like to give lots of personal anecdotes as well about my life, because, life is happening all around. Your school window is just such a small part of what else is going on for you. But it depends on your own comfort level as well. But students appreciate real, authentic. So as much as anything can feel comfortable for you, I think there's really tremendous buy-in. I use a lot of self-depreciating humor, because that's my thing that has allowed me to cope all these years. But, I can appreciate that's not always for everyone. One of the things also that I like to do, especially if I have some experience in that course, if I've either taken it before or taken something similar, I like to talk about, the feelings of being insecure, I'm not confident, I'm not going to be able to do this, the terror, the things that come up for you or you remember. If you can draw on those, I think it's really validating and normalizing to students, not to pretend that you have all the answers or that the class is going to be easy. And especially when we have first year students who really are making that transition, and there's so much happening for a first year student. It can be so overwhelming that I think it's really important to give them a chance to settle in and say, hey, this is scary and it is new and it is coming at you very fast and you're in a new environment and nothing feels like home. And really help people to settle in and get more comfortable. And I don't know if other people have had that similar experience or where you've tried it and it's fallen flat. And if anybody feels like sharing that, how else do other people create that dialogue?
I will say, I'm currently reflecting on how silence in the classroom can be a feeling of discomfort for instructors and TAs. But I do highly encourage you to practice sitting with that silence, even though I've now interrupted and jumped in. Because sometimes that it just takes time for people to come out of that space and be willing to unmute or share. Kelly in the chat asks a really important question, noting that many of these strategies that we have currently, highlighted to so far might take some time to prepare or to plan out ahead of time. And so her question is, how do we plan for this kind of consistency and effective structuring without working over much outside of contracts? Because that is important for your well-being, absolutely. So my thought on that is maybe stick to some of those strategies that do feel more in the moment or needing less preparation. I think maybe this slide would speak to some of that, like just being in some ways having that presence as a TA or as an instructor, creating that open, welcoming atmosphere in the way you introduce yourself. And but then when it's feeling as though it's taking a lot of prep time and strategizing around what that will look like, maybe that is a moment of pause to say, maybe it's for others to help me navigate. And I used to feel pretty, I spent many years navigating what humor in the classroom felt like for me. There were many years where that felt disingenuous or awkward because I kept being told this point of using humor can be a great strategy when it feels comfortable and appropriate to you. And I thought, well, I don't know what that looks like for me because I'm not an overly joking kind of individual. So how do you find yourself in the classroom space and feel as though you are reflecting a sense of authenticity as to who you perceive yourself to be? I think that's what I have found some traction in focusing on rather than humor, which didn't always resonate with me, though it would with others.
Yeah, well, you have to be careful that that the expectation doesn't become that you do, a 5-minute stand-up routine at the beginning of the class or during the class. I mean, there's a very fine line between TAing and being Chris Rock, but really, and you're right about Kelly, you make a really excellent point that in our TA contracts, very little time is dedicated, if any, to prep and to the actual interactions and what we're going to do. And really trying to just carve out a little bit of like even just 5 minutes a session if you're leading sessions or tutorials, just to even just do it in the moment, like checking in with everybody. How's your week? How's it going? Anything, one funny story that happened to you over the week and just pick a couple of people. It just sort of sets the tone, I find. So creating an accountable classroom, you notice how we don't say safe there, because not every classroom can be the safest of environments. But it's really, really important, especially at Queen's, because we take it very seriously, about creating an inclusive classroom, that we recognize the many different ways of knowing and learning, and that we are willing to give of ourselves and be vulnerable, which could look like saying, I'm sorry, I don't know, or admitting you're wrong, or being open to hearing other people's opinions that maybe really push your own buttons. And if you're leading discussions that get heated and, perhaps you can read the room that everybody needs a break, it's okay to push pause and just take a little time out and then come back to it. What's important is that you do come back to these conversations so it doesn't look like you've walked away, or that you're not interested, or that you're trying to damper the tone of the classroom, because students actually are very passionate and informed. And it's important to circle back on those tough conversations and be accountable to one another. And I think having those accountability conversations, and really you have to take your lead from the instructor as well, on what kind of classroom we all want, instructor, teaching team, and learners together. Like, we're making that environment each time we come to start a course. So think about what is happening in the world, what is happening on campus, and try and bring that into your classroom as much as possible, because we can't ignore those things. Those things are impacting students. They're bringing them to the classroom. They're touching people's lives. We have to bring that in and validate those experiences and invite opportunities to share. I'm just looking at a comment from Vicky. My dad died in school. So Vicky's comment, if you can't see, she said, many, many years ago, I was a first-year student and my dad died in an accident my first week of school. A TA sat me down and simply asked how I was doing. I learned a valuable lesson that sometimes the kindest gift is simply listening and being truly present so someone doesn't feel so alone. And Vicky tries to do that in her own teaching by paying it forward. That is, wow, Vicky, that's, very personal. Thank you so much for sharing that in the chat. So talking about mental health awareness, it's really important that we bring that into the classroom. So as a TA, know the signs of distress. So there are physical signs, which in some of the undergrads, can be tricky to recognize, because towards exam time, we all get a little bit disheveled and maybe a little unkempt and looking, maybe our personal hygiene could use some work. We've all been there, but really you will notice a trend in somebody who may be in distress. Look for signs that people maybe aren't sleeping, or perhaps there's chronic illness or disorganized speech, just something to keep in mind. Emotional distress, other sign just to think about when we're thinking about mental health awareness. So sometimes people can speak directly about the challenges they're having with mental health and will disclose to you things that are going on in their life. They're perhaps very needy, like they're emailing you all the time. They need constant reassurance and validation, really crossing the boundaries, which I know somebody had put in the Mentimeter about well-being. They could be very disruptful, disrespectful, complete change in behavior. The other sign to look for is changes in their academic performance. So that can be another sign of distress. So missing assignments regularly, you notice a difference in their grades, their attendance, perhaps they're continually seeking extensions, or they're failing to turn things in. So it's a good idea to be checking in at that time. And so some things to think about are, try and use language that is non-direct sometimes. Like, again, students sometimes fear being labeled, and using words like talking about worries versus anxiety, talking about having a hard time versus, again, pathologizing or labeling. Try not to personalize it. Often I find it's better to talk in general terms in the class. Say, we're coming up to midterms. I know this is a time when people are very stressed. People have a lot of anxiety, a lot of pressures. Sometimes we're feeling overwhelmed. Again, I think it's a really good idea to build those check-ins at the beginning, starting right up. When we talk about moving it upstream, start as you mean to go on. Build a quick check-in every time, every touch. You can even pre-populate the messages I learned, again, from Jake's session on Monday in on cue, just to be reaching out and create that open dialogue with students. But understand the limits of confidentiality. So if somebody is truly in distress, you cannot always abide by complete privacy. You might have to escalate it to the instructor. You might need to reach out if you feel that they are in physical danger or in harm. So make sure that students also understand they can absolutely come to you if that's the kind of relationship that you're building with them, but that there are things even that are above your pay grade, so to speak, things that you have to escalate for the student safety.
And this is where, I'm an instructor who didn't come through formal training in health and well-being and mental support. And so to share how I have navigated this, this is where I start to feel like I am coming up on my limits of knowledge and understanding and where to act and how to act. And so I did want to point to one of the places that I'm turning to right now to better understand or to better learn about these moments of distress or what some of my own role might be, especially around some of those limits of confidentiality and how to act appropriately within that. And so I've shared a link in the chat to the student wellness services, and they have some really great training sessions coming up that are targeted at staff, students, and faculty. Some are for students and students, again, those student supports that you could actually be offering or referring your students to and using, but some of them are for you, not only in helping you navigate some of this, but also so for example, mental health essentials and identifying and responding to students in distress during physical distancing. Those are 2 sessions that are coming up and being offered in September. So this is a prime example of places, a time where, in recognizing where you might feel is the limit of your knowledge or your comfort is a great place for learning.
Absolutely. It's okay to know your limits and know where to turn. And one of the things that I found very helpful from Brock University actually is what they call the 3 R's of being a teaching assistant. So when we're thinking about bringing mental health awareness into the classroom, it's recognize, respond, refer. So really thinking through, the physical, emotional, academic triggers or signs that somebody may be in distress, figuring out the appropriateness of your response, and referring on to the professionals when you need to, because it's not your responsibility to carry all edges of the blanket, so to speak. So if we think of resources,
yeah, for sure.
Can I, interrupt?
Debbie,
to ask
please,
a
go
question,
ahead.
please? Oh, I will just unpink myself there. Hi.
Hi.
So about the limits of confidentiality, I know through my B.Ed and M.Ed in education within public school settings and private school settings, often that limit of confidentiality, if a student comes to you and is saying that they need to tell you something very confidential, there's a requirement for you to explicitly let them know that if they are in extreme danger, that you would have to go to someone above you you can't just hold it to yourself. And so you're being explicit with them so that they know that if you feel it's too dangerous, that you can't just hold it confidentially. And so how does that stand with Queen's University, in that if a student comes to you and they're going to tell you something that really might require you to go to someone or help walk with them to another center, somehow support them in that moment of crisis. How do you explicitly tell them that, or what's the rule about that within Queens? Because you're an acting member of the team of Queens, you're not there as you're not there as a personal friend, right? You are a TA, so it's what is that gray space there? What's required of us?
It will be in some ways context specific, but I think it's valuable to know that in that situation, I would recommend listening first to what the student is telling you. In some ways, I think it's a difficult order to decide, because you do want to let them know that you might have certain responsibilities, or you might want to encourage them to be connecting with other services, but then that listening is so important as well, and to give the student some options to say, well, I do know of other resources that are here that I can help you in navigating. That's where I think this green guide that's up on the screen is really important, so that you have something, even if it's this alone, to give to that student. Because I would say that I've always sensed there is a bit of a distinction between the K-12 practices and then higher ed, where we want to inform the students are adults that ultimately will make some important decisions about how they access resources. But it comes down to the context specific, because I have been in situations where I decided to call the campus emergency services for a student that was having a very physical response to her stress. And I stayed with her. I let her know what I was deciding to do, who I was reaching out to, and I just continue to come back to, I am here for you and helping you connect with those other resources.
Great. Okay.
And Debbie, I think you raised a good point. As a registered health professional, for example, I'm bound by my college. I have a duty to report, and that my duties to report are most significantly around children. So definitely, like you were saying, school boards, of course, not with adults, mind you. However, someone is in imminent harm or imminent, we do have a professional obligation, depending on our backgrounds, of course, but also as a member of the Queen's community, to stay with that person, to keep them safe. We might have to escalate to emergency services for sure, or to accompany them. But usually, when I think it's important also to be very clear with the class, like you can absolutely, especially if this is the kind of environment that you're trying to create, to be very clear from the outset, from day one, again, going back to moving upstream, that if somebody is in imminent danger, you will be taking the necessary steps. So reiterating that all the way, because if somebody really is in that kind of crisis, they may not be in that moment capable of consenting anyways.
Right. Okay. And then a partnered question on that is, in this virtual world of COVID presently, and if you have a student who goes into that kind of crisis mode in the moment, and you're virtual with them in that sharing, any thoughts on how to, because you're not there in person with them? What are your thoughts on how we can support them in that moment? They might not even be in our city.
I must admit, that's where I'm really looking forward to the training available through student wellness, because that's the focus of the one session coming up in September, later in September, of identifying and responding to students in distress during physical distancing, which I imagine they will certainly address the fact that physical distancing might mean that you are in very different geographical locations and being through Zoom. So the best, I can suggest is what, in many ways, what we've already been talking about. I can't speak of personal experience of being in the Zoom session and noticing that there's someone through the camera who's in distress, though I have just kept up with the consistent reaching out to my students, and especially when I notice that they're maybe not attending synchronous sessions as frequently as I thought they would, or if they have been missing on some of the assignments, then I reach out and I just say, hey, how's it going? So yeah, I do definitely, I'm looking forward to that additional training there.
And Debbie, I'm afraid I don't have any personal experience with that. I've seen over the last 18 months, we've gone from a cameras on, let's do this environment, to now people are Zoom fatigued. You know, it's so much harder to engage students. It's harder to even get the people who are well to engage. So it's becoming harder and harder. And then they might not be in your city. They might not be in the country, right? You're dealing with time zones. I think Lauren's approach is a great one, right? Just try and keep those lines of communication open.
Mm-hmm. Great, so, yeah, thanks, Debbie. That's some really great questions. I do.
Oh, and I'm sorry. I just wanted to respond, Lauren, to Innocent put.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
About non-direct language. So
yeah.
What I mean by that. So non-direct language is, and it's not recognizing that we've come a long way on our journey with mental health awareness, but there's still a great deal of stigma. And it's to not to necessarily talk around the issue, but it really is to be able to use many different words to try and reach a student, because if you haven't accepted that you have anxiety or depression, or that maybe you're in a moment of extreme distress, maybe the words that you resonate with you are worries, or I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. So it's really trying to use many different words to come at the same issue is what I meant. Because sometimes, and really also thinking about, once you get to know your students, what are their backgrounds? Where have they come from? Because we've all come from different places to Queens, and our backgrounds and experience are all a little bit different. And people from different cultures have different ways of expressing and embodying some of these distresses. I don't know if that clarified it or if I've just made it clear as mud. But if you'd like to continue that conversation, Innocent, by all means, reach out to me afterwards. But the green folder, and we put a QR code. This is a great resource, all one that gives you a good jumping off point for resources that you might want to, you don't have to know them all, you don't have to memorize them all, but at least if you sort of know where to access them, maybe just refer to it as needed.
Yeah, and a copy of this PDF is in the folder of resources. So you can access it there. And I do believe they update it every once in a while. So it is hosted on the web. But great resource just to know where it is, either in your electronic folders or even to print it out and have it handy in your instructional resources.
Yeah, are really, really good. Now, I'm very sorry. I know that we're running out of time, and it upsets me because I think it's really important to talk about self-care, and self-care sometimes always gets put in the last 2 minutes and then we just touch on it briefly, but I really think it's really important. So self-care is whatever you need it to be. It is about creating strategies for you. So what works for me might not be what you need. And balance is fluid. And I have 3 kids who have been home off and on for the last year. So finding time for myself might be at 11 o'clock, and where it might have looked like a yoga class now looks like Schitt's Creek. So it's about figuring out what you need, and also about how to protect your boundaries and role model them. So thinking about when you're going to respond to students and being very clear about what's the timeline, what they can expect, and then trying to stick within those boundaries. There are times when students really do need an immediate response, but maybe they can wait 24 hours to review their grade. But really, it's about making sure you get enough sleep. Sleep is the most important thing. And for some people, exercise is great. Exercise to me sometimes is personal hell, and that does not seem like something I want to do when I want to relax and restore myself. But you have to take care of your own health. You have to make sure that you're a priority. And that also means understanding the limits of your contract as a teaching assistant, so that you're not contracted for 35 hours, but you actually have 50 hours of work to do. So it's about that, but also, to Debbie's point, as the environment is changing a lot and we're supporting students in new and different ways, not just with their learning strategies, but also in their emotional and physical health sometimes. So it's looking for opportunities and knowing where you can reach out to debrief, whether it's with your instructor, whether it's within your department, whether it's with your peers. And sometimes it is getting out for that walk in nature, but it's really about doing what feels good to you. And that may change on a week-to-week basis.
So I thought I would end the slide show, and with the remaining 2 minutes of our time, just open up that floor and invite and let you know that we are here. Because if there are remaining questions, we're open to those and open to conversation. One of the things we thought we would leave you with is identifying maybe the one thing that stands out to you as something you can try. And something that might feel like it's not going to take you tons of prep and tons of effort to put in place, but something that you're just going to ground yourself on and remind yourself that that's an integral or important part of who you are as an instructor, as a support for students.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to look through some of the comments here. So Tara reminding us that TAs especially, and this applies for adjunct instructors as well, for sure, and for faculty who are, all of us are very carefully managing our time. So putting in place practices that you can track your hours, and it sounds like PSAC has a resource there that Carolyn's sharing in the comments. And Innocent asking about how to access the recording. So it will be posted on our CTL YouTube channel. And I believe Sandra also follows up with some additional resources and the survey as well.